Locations to separate local and mainland poultry under consideration. Reports of a generous offer to those affected by a Manila hostage crisis. And unrest grips Bosnia.
Good evening. The government has identified several locations in its attempt to separate local and mainland poultry to help fight bird flu. But the health chief says none of the sites are satisfactory. Vicky Kung reports.
The search for locations to separate local and mainland poultry to avoid cross-contamination. Secretary for Food and Health Ko Wing-man reviewed today that the government has been assessing several potential sites for that purpose. But the health chief said the sites are far from ideal. He says some of the venues to store mainland poultry temporarily are not equipped with a satisfactory sewage system, while others are situated near certain facilities that could cause problems. Currently, imported birds from the mainland are sent to the Chengsha temporary wholesale poultry market alongside local poultry, pending test results. 20,000 birds were culled last month after samples from the mainland tested positive for the H7N9 virus. The government has also suspended the sale of all live poultry until the 18th of this month. Local vendors are hard hit. Kwok Ming Chun co-owns 7 chicken farms with his friends. He said he has accumulated over 60,000 adult chickens that are ready for the market.
We expect to sell maybe at half price, okay? And this will already cost about $40 per chicks, and that will be totally about 2,500,000, right?
Kwok is also worried about history repeating itself if local and mainland poultry isn't separated. He's called on the government to consider this location in Takuleng. This place used to be a farm that tested newly imported species of pigs to see if they can adapt to the local environment. Kwok believes this is a good spot because it's only a 15-minute ride from Mankamto and it has facilities like ventilation and sewage systems already installed. But the government is against the idea, saying the plot is expected to be rezoned for other purposes in future. Vicky Kong, TVB News.
A Philippine newspaper has reported that the Philippine government will offer a generous amount to victims of the families and survivors of the deadly 2010 Manila bus hostage incident. But as Evelyn Leung reports, the offer has not been well received here in Hong Kong.
A Philippine newspaper has reported that a Department of Foreign Affairs spokesman said his government is trying to end the diplomatic rift between Hong Kong and his country. The 2010 Manila bus hostage tragedy killed 8 people from Hong Kong. The first round of sanctions imposed by the SAR government against the Philippines is already in effect. That follows the refusal by Philippine President Benigno Aquino to offer a formal apology. The Foreign Affairs spokesman said a generous amount would be provided to the families of the victims and survivors. There is no word on what the amount would be. The spokesman also said his government hopes this gesture of solidarity will put an end to the incident, but a cold response here in Hong Kong. One of the survivors, Yik Siu Ling, said she hasn't heard anything about the offer yet. Yik, who recently underwent reconstructive surgery in Taiwan, complained that the Philippine government has all along talked about compensation only, while insisting it won't offer an apology. This, she says, is disrespectful to the victims and their families, because not everything can be solved by money. Lawmaker James To, who's been helping the survivors and victims of the families, says this is how the others feel as well. The Security Bureau, meanwhile, encouraged the Philippines to continue dialogue with Hong Kong to try to meet the demands of the victims and their families. Evelyn Lang, TVB News.
The chairman of the Consumer Council says the watchdog is studying how to implement a cooling-off mechanism in an attempt to better protect consumer rights. He also waded into the dispute involving a group of cruise passengers this week.
Disgruntled holidaymakers, whom for hours on Thursday refused to leave their ship, finally resolved the dispute with their travel agency last night. They were unhappy because one of the stops was skipped. The Consumer Council said as of this morning it had not received complaints about the matter. Speaking to TVB News today, the chairman of the Consumer Watchdog said perhaps the problem comes down to cruisers being relatively new to Hong Kong's travel culture.
They are not quite familiar with the uniqueness of taking the cruise, including the itinerary, including the spending, so on and so forth.
Wong said cruise passengers are usually given documents warning of potential itinerary changes due to unforeseen circumstances, but most people never read them.
But even you have this kind of stipulation, it doesn't mean that the cruise company has no responsibility. I think the crucial thing is because this is a group tour, they are organized by a travel company. So if the tour guide could really take a chance to patiently explain the situation and try to calm them down, it may not develop to the situation like we have today.
On better protecting consumer rights, the watchdog is now studying what's called a cooling-off mechanism that allows people to cancel certain types of purchases within a certain period of time.
It's quite common in other countries, particularly, let's say, in Singapore. They do have this kind of cooling period for 7 days. And actually, when you sign a contract, the credit card will not be cashed within that 7 days until you further confirm that you're going further.
Wong expressed hope this could be implemented in a year or two, but admitted details still need to be ironed out with the businesses first.
Turning overseas now, heavy snow wreaked havoc in Tokyo today, disrupting public transport. The Japan Meteorological Agency issued the first heavy snowfall warning for central Tokyo in 13 years. By mid-afternoon, about 10 centimetres of snow had fallen. Snowfall in the Japanese capital is said to be unusual. Authorities say it was caused by a rapidly developing low-pressure front heading northeast. Some roads were closed because of the bad weather, and many flights in and out of Haneda Airport were suspended. Well, civil unrest is growing in Bosnia, where protesters spent another day battling riot police and attacking government buildings. The protesters are angry at a lack of jobs and the government's perceived inability to do anything about the high unemployment rate. The anger had been simmering for a while, but now parts of Bosnia and Herzegovina are facing the wrath of the people. In cities like Tuzla, Mostar, Zenica and the capital Sarajevo, protesters fed up with the administration trashed and set fire to government buildings. Among the buildings that burned, parts of the presidential palace and the headquarters of the coalition government. Hundreds fought running battles with police, who fired tear gas and used rubber bullets against the mob. So why this winter of discontent? Well, like other stories about civil unrest, growing resentment at unemployment, inflation, perceived government corruption, and a people who generally feel their country offers no prospects, seems to have created a perfect storm, which is now playing out on the streets of Bosnia. It began in Tuzla earlier this week, when workers started protesting against the closure and sale of their factories. Given many in the city are blue-collar workers, the closures hit the local population hard. Soon after, the protests spread to other cities, where many sympathise with those in Tuzla and their anger at the government for failing to tackle unemployment. The general unemployment rate in Bosnia is around 40%, one of the highest in Europe. So far, the unrest seems to be confined to the Muslim Bosniak and Croat parts of the country. Still, the unrest is unprecedented in post-war Bosnia, where Serbs, Croats and Bosniaks have tolerated political stagnation for years, rather than risk a return to conflict. The civil war in the middle of the 1990s followed the breakup of the former Yugoslavia and left tens of thousands dead.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel has condemned the apparent remarks of a senior US diplomat who used a swear word to express her frustration with the European Union over its position on Ukraine's political crisis. Merkel said Victoria Nuland's insult at the EU's diplomatic efforts was totally unacceptable, a position which was reiterated by Germany's foreign minister during a trip to Italy. The U.S. Assistant Secretary of State made the remarks in a phone call to the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, a conversation which was then leaked online, allegedly by a Russian official. But the official in question later denied he or his government had anything to do with the leak, claiming he came across the video while browsing through YouTube.
Dozens of women, children and elderly people were evacuated from battle-torn neighbourhoods in the Syrian city of Homs yesterday. It's part of a rare three-day ceasefire that will allow the entrance of aid convoys. It was one of the few agreements reached at peace talks last month between representatives of President Bashar al-Assad and opposition leaders. A second round of talks is set for Monday. About 80 people were brought out of the city. Residents of Homs have endured a crushing blockade and severe food shortages for more than a year.
And still to come in our news tonight. The Winter Olympics open in style. Locally subsidised housing may be built at MTR project. And the discovery of some really old human footprints.